Welcome to Softly Curious. Tonight, we step into a forest not as hikers, not as visitors, but as quiet observers of structure. A forest can seem like a single mass of green from a distance. Up close, it reveals itself as architecture. Vertical, layered, deliberate. A living construction built from light, time, and patient competition. If you stand still and look upward, the first thing you notice is that a forest grows in levels. In many temperate regions, the structure begins with the forest floor and rises through understory into canopy. In tropical regions, there is an additional layer above the canopy known as the emergent layer. These emergent trees can rise 60 to 70 meters above the ground, lifting their crowns into stronger winds and uninterrupted sunlight. In parts of the Amazon rainforest, only a small fraction of trees ever reach this height. The majority remain below, competing in quieter shade. The canopy forms a dense ceiling of leaves that intercepts most of the available sunlight. Measurements in tropical forests show that as much as 90% of incoming sunlight is absorbed or reflected by this upper layer. By the time light filters down to the forest floor, often less than 2% remains. This imbalance shapes everything below it. Leaves in the understory tend to be broader and thinner, designed to capture faint, scattered light. Chlorophyll concentrations are often higher in shade-tolerant species, allowing photosynthesis to continue at lower energy thresholds. Light in a forest is not evenly distributed. It moves, shifts, fractures. When a large tree falls during a storm, it creates a temporary opening known as a canopy gap. These gaps are small, but their impact is precise. Sunlight pours downward into the opening, sometimes increasing ground-level light exposure several times over. This process, known as gap dynamics, allows suppressed saplings to accelerate growth. Some species remain in slow, vertical suspension for decades, waiting for such an opportunity. Growth in forests is often less about speed and more about timing. Trees do not grow straight upward by accident. Their orientation is influenced by phototropism, a biological response to light. A plant hormone called auxin redistributes within the stem when one side receives more light than the other. Cells elongate unevenly, causing the trunk or branch to bend toward brighter conditions. Over time, this produces subtle curves in forest trees, especially along edges or in uneven terrain. What looks like organic randomness often reflects precise biochemical response. Height itself is a strategy. Along the Pacific coast of North America, the species Sequoia sempervirens can exceed 100 meters in height under ideal conditions. These coast redwoods do not reach such scale quickly. Their growth combines long lifespans, efficient water transport systems, and flexible wood fibers that allow slight sway without structural failure. The tallest individuals tend to grow in fog-influenced climates, where moisture from marine air supplements rainfall. Height is not simply ambition. It is access to light in crowded vertical space. Not all forests are built the same way. Younger forests often appear dense and uniform. Many trees grow at similar heights because they established themselves around the same time, perhaps after fire, logging, or natural disturbance. Older forests, by contrast, display uneven canopies. Some trees tower above others, while gaps and irregular crowns create a more complex skyline. Structural diversity increases with age. Dead standing trees, fallen trunks, and irregular light penetration become part of the design. Age adds asymmetry. This difference between young and old forests can be measured not only in shape, but in growth rate. Young forests tend to accumulate biomass rapidly. Their trees prioritize upward expansion and leaf production. In mature forests, growth slows, but stability increases. Energy allocation shifts toward maintenance rather than rapid height gain. A centuries-old forest may expand only incrementally in height, yet its structural complexity deepens. Inside each trunk, time is stored in layers. In temperate climates, most trees form visible annual growth rings. These rings vary in width depending on environmental conditions. Wider rings often correspond to favorable growing seasons with adequate rainfall and moderate temperatures. Narrow rings suggest stress, such as drought or cold. In some regions, scientists have reconstructed climate patterns spanning thousands of years by analyzing tree rings. The science of reading these patterns is known as dendrochronology. In areas like Yellowstone National Park, preserved wood samples have allowed researchers to correlate ring patterns with historical fire events and volcanic activity. Certain years leave signatures across entire regions. A major eruption can reduce sunlight temporarily, producing thinner rings the following season. Droughts echo quietly through wood long after they pass. A tree ring is not simply a circle. It is a record of resource allocation. During spring, when growth is rapid, cells tend to be larger and lighter in color. Later in the season, growth slows and cells become smaller and denser. This creates the contrast that makes rings visible. In some species, growth rings are clear and distinct. In tropical forests, where seasonal variation is less pronounced, rings may be faint or irregular. Even there, subtle density shifts can reveal environmental rhythm. Vertical structure, light interception, growth rate, and internal record keeping are not separate systems. They overlap. A tall tree intercepting more light will often produce wider rings in favorable years. A tree suppressed beneath canopy shade may record decades of narrow growth before suddenly expanding when a gap opens above it. The forest canopy, seen from above, resembles a continuous surface. Seen through time, it is an uneven archive. Height in forests is constrained by physics as well as biology. Water must be transported from roots to leaves against gravity. In very tall trees, this process approaches mechanical limits. Coast redwoods manage this challenge through a combination of capillary action and transpirational pull. Leaves release water vapor, creating negative pressure that draws moisture upward. At extreme heights, this system becomes less efficient, which partly explains why there is a natural ceiling to tree growth. Even wind contributes to structural logic. Trees exposed to consistent directional wind often develop thicker wood on the windward side. This asymmetrical growth increases mechanical stability. In open coastal forests, trunks may lean slightly inland due to persistent ocean winds, then compensate with denser fiber formation. Mechanical stress becomes instruction. If you could view a forest from above over decades, you would see waves of rise and pause. Individual trees surge upward when conditions allow, then slow as they reach canopy level. Others wait below, suspended in low light, their metabolism reduced but not stopped. The emergent layer is not crowded because reaching it requires rare alignment of age, stability, and opportunity. What appears as stillness is layered motion over time. The canopy shifts slightly with each season. Growth rings form silently beneath bark. Saplings adjust direction by degrees, so small they are invisible day to day. A forest does not grow all at once. It organizes itself upward, patiently, according to access to light and the constraints of gravity. Standing within it, you rarely see the full height. But the structure is there, rising above in tiers, each level shaped by light, competition, and long memory. In this vertical arrangement, the forest becomes less a collection of trees and more a living column of time. And as we continue downward later, toward soil and roots, that column will extend beneath our feet as well. When we lower our gaze from trunks and crowns to the ground itself, the forest changes scale. What seemed solid underfoot becomes layered, textured, and quietly active. Soil in a forest is not uniform earth. It is arranged in horizons, each with its own composition, density, and function. The uppermost layer is known as the O horizon, a surface band made largely of organic material. Fallen leaves, needles, fragments of bark, and decomposing wood accumulate here, forming a loose, dark covering that softens sound and slows evaporation. Beneath it lies the horizon, often called topsoil. This layer blends partially decomposed organic matter with mineral particles, such as sand, silt, and clay. It is typically darker than the layers below because it holds higher concentrations of carbon-rich material. In many temperate forests, most fine roots and microbial activity are concentrated in this upper zone. Nutrients released from decaying litter do not travel far. They are absorbed close to where they are produced, creating a tight cycle of release and reuse. In primeval forests, such as the Bioiega forest, the accumulation of humus can be striking. In undisturbed sections, the organic layer may exceed 10 centimeters in thickness. Fallen trunks are left to decay naturally, and the slow breakdown of wood contributes additional structure to the soil. This depth is not only a measure of age, but of continuity. Where disturbance is minimal, the soil surface becomes a long-term archive of biological turnover. Decomposition itself varies dramatically depending on climate. In tropical regions, warm temperatures and high moisture accelerate microbial and fungal activity. Leaf litter may break down within months. In colder boreal systems, the same material can persist for several years. The rate of decay determines how quickly nutrients return to circulation. It also influences carbon storage, since slower decomposition allows more organic matter to accumulate over time. The relationship between climate, elevation, and vegetation was carefully observed by Alexander von Humboldt in the early 19th century. While traveling across South America, he noted that changes in altitude often mirrored changes in latitude. Soil character shifted alongside plant communities, suggesting that temperature and moisture gradients shaped both above-ground and below-ground systems. His observations helped establish the idea that ecosystems operate as interconnected wholes rather than isolated components. Roots occupy most of the biologically active soil zone. Contrary to common assumption, the majority of tree roots are not deep vertical anchors. In many forest types, nearly 80% of fine root biomass lies within the top 60 centimeters of soil. This distribution reflects nutrient availability, which is highest near the surface. Fine roots branch extensively, forming dense networks that increase surface area for absorption. Some species adopt a different strategy. A taproot, which grows downward more directly, can provide access to deeper moisture reserves in drier environments. Yet even taprooted species rely heavily on lateral roots for nutrient uptake. Root systems often extend horizontally, well beyond the visible spread of branches above ground. In dense forests, these networks overlap extensively, though each tree maintains its own vascular boundary. In fire-adapted ecosystems of western North America, the species lodgepole pine often develops a relatively shallow root system. This structure allows rapid colonization of disturbed soils, but makes mature trees more vulnerable to strong wind when soil is saturated. The balance between speed of establishment and structural anchoring reflects environmental trade-offs rather than design flaws. Below the main root zone lies the water table, the level at which soil becomes fully saturated. Its depth varies seasonally and geographically. In riparian forests, roots may reach close to permanent groundwater supplies. In upland regions, trees depend more heavily on rainfall and stored soil moisture. When prolonged drought lowers the water table, root systems may extend deeper in search of available water, though this growth is constrained by soil density and oxygen availability. Soil composition also influences water retention. Clay-rich soils hold moisture more effectively, but drain slowly, while sandy soils allow faster percolation. Research conducted through long-term monitoring programs by the United States Department of Agriculture has mapped variations in root depth and soil texture across forest regions. These datasets show consistent patterns. Tree species adapt their rooting depth to local hydrological conditions rather than following a fixed blueprint. What feels like solid ground is, in reality, a layered interface between decay and renewal. Organic material falls, breaks apart, and becomes mineral-bound. Roots thread through pores in search of dissolved nutrients. Moisture rises and recedes with seasonal rhythms. The forest above is supported by this dynamic foundation, shaped by gravity, water, and microbial transformation. The architecture continues downward, quieter but no less intricate. Beneath the visible structure of trunks and leaves, another structure extends quietly through the soil. It is not made of wood, and it does not rise toward the light. It spreads laterally, branching into threads so fine they are nearly invisible to the naked eye. These threads belong to fungi. When they connect with plant roots, they form what is known as a mycorrhizal network, a biological partnership that reshapes how nutrients and carbon move through a forest. The term mycorrhiza describes a symbiotic relationship between fungal filaments and plant roots. In this partnership, fungi colonize the outer surface of roots, or in some cases, penetrate root cells themselves. The plant provides carbohydrates produced through photosynthesis. The fungus provides access to water and mineral nutrients that would otherwise remain out of reach. This exchange is not rare or exceptional. It is the dominant condition in most forests on Earth. It is estimated that over 90% of terrestrial plant species form some type of mycorrhizal association. Fungal networks are built from microscopic filaments called hyphae. A single hypha is thinner than a human hair, yet collectively they form vast underground webs. These webs can extend far beyond the immediate root zone of any one tree. Because fungal threads are so fine, they can penetrate small pores in soil that roots cannot access directly. This increases the effective surface area available for nutrient absorption. Phosphorus, nitrogen, and trace minerals are gathered through this network and transported back toward plant roots. The architecture of these networks is dynamic. Hyphae grow, branch, fuse, and decay in response to environmental conditions. In nutrient-poor soils, fungal density often increases. In nutrient-rich soils, reliance on fungal partners may decrease. The structure is not static. It is responsive, adjusting to local availability and competition. Some networks connect only a few neighboring plants. Others span larger areas, linking multiple species in shared exchange. Research in the late 20th century brought new attention to the scale and function of these underground systems. One of the most widely cited contributors to this field is Suzanne Simard. Working in temperate forests of Western North America, she investigated how carbon moves between trees through fungal connections. Her experiments helped demonstrate that carbon fixed by one tree could be transferred to another via shared mycorrhizal pathways. Much of this work was conducted at the University of British Columbia, where long-term field studies examined relationships among conifer species. In controlled experiments, researchers labeled carbon dioxide with stable isotopes and tracked its movement from one tree to neighboring individuals. The findings suggested that carbon does not remain confined within a single trunk. Under certain conditions, it travels. One frequently studied species in these experiments is the Douglas fir. In mixed forests where Douglas fir grows alongside paper birch and other species, shared fungal networks link their root systems. When one species receives more light and produces more carbohydrates, some portion of that carbon can move through the fungal web to a shaded neighbor. The direction and amount of transfer depend on gradients of supply and demand rather than hierarchy. Carbon transfer is not constant or evenly distributed. It follows concentration differences. When one tree experiences stress or reduced photosynthetic capacity, it may receive supplemental carbon through these connections. In shaded understory conditions, seedlings often struggle to produce sufficient energy through limited light exposure. Yet when they are connected to mature trees through mycorrhizal fungi, their survival rates can increase. This phenomenon is sometimes described using the phrase mother tree, referring to large, established individuals that appear to play a central role in network connectivity. In forests studied by Siemert and colleagues, older Douglas fir trees were found to have extensive fungal linkages with younger seedlings. When these older trees were removed, seedling mortality increased in some cases. The pattern suggests that network position matters. Larger trees often host more extensive fungal associations, simply because of their size and longevity. The concept does not imply intention or awareness. Carbon flow through fungal networks operates according to gradients, not decisions. Yet the effect resembles support. A shaded seedling connected to a mature tree can receive measurable carbon transfer during periods of low light. This exchange can improve resilience during early growth stages. In dense forests where canopy cover limits light penetration, such support may influence long-term composition. Mycorrhizal networks also affect how nutrients are allocated spatially. Fungi can redistribute nitrogen from areas of higher concentration to areas where roots are more actively growing. Because fungal hyphae move efficiently through soil pores, they create channels of connectivity that bypass some of the physical limitations of root growth. This reduces competition in certain contexts and enhances overall nutrient capture efficiency. Not all fungi form the same type of association. Ectomycorrhizal fungi wrap around the exterior of roots and form a sheath-like structure. Arbuscular mycorrhizal fungi penetrate root cells and form branched internal structures that facilitate exchange. Douglas fir primarily associates with ectomycorrhizal species, which are common in temperate and boreal forests. These fungi form visible fruiting bodies above ground, including familiar mushrooms, but their primary biomass remains underground. Network connectivity can extend across species boundaries. In mixed forests, a single fungal species may connect multiple plant species simultaneously. This interspecific linkage creates pathways for carbon and nutrient exchange that are not restricted by taxonomic similarity. The forest floor becomes less a collection of isolated individuals and more a physiologically integrated system. Measurements of carbon movement through fungal networks are subtle but detectable. In isotope tracing experiments, labeled carbon introduced to one tree was later identified in the tissues of neighboring trees. The quantities are small relative to total biomass, yet biologically significant. Even modest carbon supplementation can influence seedling survival in low-light conditions. Fungal networks also influence water dynamics. Although roots remain the primary structures for water uptake, hyphae can access thin films of moisture that roots cannot directly reach. By increasing the absorptive surface area, fungi enhance drought tolerance in some species. In dry years, trees with well-developed mycorrhizal associations often maintain higher water status compared to those without such partnerships. The scale of mycorrhizal networks is difficult to grasp at first. Within a single cubic meter of forest soil, there can be kilometers of fungal filaments. These microscopic threads move between mineral grains, wrap around root tips, and merge with other hyphae to form junctions where resources can pass from one plant to another. There is no central control point directing this exchange. The system expands through growth and contact, forming a decentralized web shaped by proximity and opportunity rather than hierarchy. This network is sensitive to disturbance. Clear-cutting, heavy machinery, and soil compaction can reduce fungal biomass and fragment existing connections. In reforestation projects, seedlings placed into sterilized or heavily disturbed soil often grow more slowly until fungal partnerships are re-established. By contrast, seedlings planted near intact root systems frequently connect to existing networks more quickly. The continuity of fungal threads influences how efficiently young trees access nutrients and water during early development. The relationship between trees and fungi remains reciprocal but flexible. Trees supply carbohydrates produced through photosynthesis, while fungi extend their reach into soil pores to gather nutrients. When soil nutrients are abundant, trees may allocate less carbon to fungal partners. When nutrients are scarce, carbon investment tends to increase. This exchange follows efficiency rather than intention. In shaded understories, seedlings connected to mature trees through shared networks may receive supplemental carbon during periods of low light. The transfer leaves no visible trace, yet isotopic analysis confirms its movement. Beneath the forest floor, energy circulates through living threads, quietly shaping survival and growth. Roots are not the only channels through which trees communicate. Above the soil, in open air, forests also exchange information through chemistry. When leaves are damaged by insects or grazed by herbivores, many trees release volatile organic compounds, often abbreviated as VOCs. These molecules evaporate easily and travel through the air. They are not random emissions. They carry biochemical signals that neighboring plants can detect. Volatile organic compounds include a wide range of substances, such as green leaf volatiles, jasminates, and various aromatic compounds. When a leaf is chewed, internal signaling pathways activate within minutes. Enzymes trigger the synthesis of these airborne chemicals, which diffuse outward from the site of damage. Nearby plants exposed to these signals may begin adjusting their own chemistry before they are directly attacked. This response does not require physical contact. It relies on sensitivity to molecular cues in the surrounding air. One major group of these compounds is terpenes. Terpenes are carbon-based molecules synthesized through specific metabolic pathways inside plant cells. They serve multiple roles, including attracting pollinators, repelling herbivores, and signaling distress. In coniferous forests, the distinctive scent often associated with resin is largely due to terpene production. When bark is breached by insects, resin canals can flood the damaged area with sticky, terpene-rich fluid that both traps invaders and releases chemical signals. Research conducted at institutions such as the Max Planck Institute for Chemical Ecology has examined how plants perceive and respond to airborne signals. Laboratory and field experiments have shown that exposure to certain VOCs can prime neighboring plants. Priming does not mean immediate full defense activation. Instead, it prepares cellular pathways so that if attack occurs, the defensive response is faster and stronger. This mechanism reduces metabolic cost while preserving readiness. A frequently cited field example comes from the savanna ecosystems of East Africa. In parts of the Serengeti, acacia trees subjected to intense browsing by herbivores have been observed increasing tannin concentrations in their leaves. Tannins reduce palatability and digestibility. Studies have suggested that nearby acacias, downwind of heavily browsed individuals, sometimes elevate their own tannin levels even before direct grazing occurs. Airborne chemical signals appear to contribute to this coordinated shift in defense. Early warning in forests often operates within short distances. Volatile compounds disperse relatively quickly and dilute in open air. As a result, the most pronounced signaling tends to occur among neighboring plants. Wind direction, humidity, and canopy density influence how far these molecules travel. In dense stands, slower air movement can allow signals to linger, increasing the likelihood of detection by nearby leaves. Insect attacks themselves can trigger layered responses. Some trees emit specific blends of terpenes that attract predators or parasitoids of the attacking insect species. For example, when caterpillars feed on certain leaves, the plant may release compounds that draw wasps, which lay eggs in those caterpillars. This indirect defense reduces herbivore pressure without the tree needing to produce continuously high levels of toxic chemicals. Chemical signaling and defense in forests therefore operate across multiple levels. A leaf damaged by a beetle initiates internal biochemical cascades, releases volatile compounds into the air, and alters the chemistry of surrounding tissue. Neighboring trees may respond by priming their own defenses. Resin production may increase, tannin concentrations may shift, and defensive pathways may activate more rapidly upon subsequent attack. None of this requires sound or visible motion. The forest responds through gradients of scent and molecular exchange, maintaining vigilance in ways that remain largely imperceptible to human senses. Movement in a forest does not always require legs or wings. Trees do not walk, yet forests expand, contract, and rearrange themselves over time. This movement begins with seeds. Each season, trees and understory plants release structures designed not for permanence, but for travel. Some drift, some fall, some attach, some wait. The forest, in this sense, is never still. It is constantly sending fragments at itself outward. Wind is one of the simplest carriers. Lightweight seeds rely on air currents to move them beyond the shade of their parent tree. Their shapes are not accidental. They are the result of small aerodynamic adjustments refined over long evolutionary periods. A seed that travels a few meters farther than others may escape competition, reach open ground, and survive. Over generations, that difference accumulates. One of the most familiar examples is Taraxacum officinale. Each dandelion seed is attached to a delicate tuft of bristles known as a pappus. This structure acts like a parachute. When wind lifts it, the seed can remain suspended longer than its weight would otherwise allow. Studies using high-speed photography have shown that the pappus creates a stable vortex ring of air above it, increasing drag and stabilizing descent. What appears fragile is, in aerodynamic terms, efficient. Maple trees use a different strategy. Their seeds, known as samaras, are winged structures that spin as they fall. The asymmetrical shape causes rotation, slowing descent, and allowing lateral drift. This spinning motion generates lift in a way similar to a single-bladed helicopter rotor. The design increases the likelihood that seeds will land beyond the densest shade directly beneath the parent canopy. Distance reduces competition for light and nutrients. Wind dispersal is most effective in open or seasonally exposed conditions. In dense forests, air movement is slower and less predictable. Some species release seeds during periods when leaves are absent or before full canopy development, increasing airflow at ground level. Timing becomes part of the strategy. Release too early, and frost may damage emerging seedlings. Release too late, and the seed may drop into deep shade. Not all seeds rely on air. Many depend on animals for transport. This method, known as zookery, involves either ingestion or attachment. Fleshy fruits attract birds and mammals, who consume the pulp and later deposit seeds elsewhere. Passage through digestive systems can scarify seed coats, increasing the likelihood of successful germination. In this way, digestion becomes preparation rather than destruction. Other seeds use hooks, barbs, or sticky coatings to cling to fur or feathers. As animals move through underbrush, seeds detach at varying distances from the parent plant. This strategy often produces uneven distribution patterns. Clusters may form near resting sites, water sources, or habitual paths. The forest floor reflects the roots of its inhabitants. Dispersal is not only about distance, it is about placement. A seed that travels far but lands on rock or deeply compacted soil may not survive. Successful colonization requires alignment between seed arrival and environmental conditions. Soil texture, moisture levels, and exposure to light all influence the probability of germination. Even slight differences in microtopography can determine outcome. Dormancy adds another layer of strategy. Many seeds do not germinate immediately after landing. Instead, they enter a state of suspended activity. Hard outer coats may prevent water absorption until specific temperature or moisture thresholds are met. Some species require exposure to cold conditions before germination becomes possible, a process known as stratification. Others respond to chemical signals released by fire or by the decay of surrounding vegetation. Dormancy distributes risk across time. Rather than allowing all seeds to germinate in a single season, a portion remains viable in the soil for years. This soil seed bank acts as a reserve. If one year proves unfavorable due to drought or heavy shading, future seasons may provide better conditions. The forest maintains continuity through delayed emergence. When disturbances occur, whether from fallen trees, minor landslides, or localized soil disruption, opportunities arise for rapid colonization. Pioneer species are often the first to occupy these spaces. They are characterized by fast growth, high seed production, and tolerance for exposed conditions. Their seeds are typically lightweight and widely dispersed. They do not require deep shade to establish. Instead, they capitalize on openness. Pioneer species alter their surroundings as they grow. By stabilizing soil with roots and adding organic matter through leaf litter, they gradually modify conditions. Over time, slower-growing species may replace them. This process, often described as succession, begins with dispersal. Without seeds capable of reaching newly opened ground, succession cannot proceed. Seed size also influences strategy. Smaller seeds can be produced in greater numbers and travel farther, but they contain fewer stored nutrients. Larger seeds carry more internal resources, increasing the likelihood that seedlings can survive in shaded or nutrient-poor conditions. However, larger seeds are heavier and typically disperse over shorter distances. Forest composition reflects this balance between quantity and investment. Some species release seeds in mass years, producing exceptionally high numbers simultaneously. This strategy overwhelms seed predators. When more seeds are available than animals can consume, a fraction survives simply through abundance. Mast years are often irregular and influenced by environmental cues. The result is episodic pulses every generation. Water can also serve as a dispersal medium. In riparian forests, seeds that float may travel along streams and rivers, settling in sediment deposits downstream. Buoyancy depends on structural features, such as air pockets or water-resistant coatings. Movement through water tends to align dispersal with landscape contours, shaping forest patterns along valleys and floodplains. Even gravity plays a role. Some seeds are heavy and fall directly beneath the parent tree. In these cases, dispersal may be secondary. Rodents and other small mammals collect and cache seeds for later consumption. Forgotten caches can germinate, creating scattered growth beyond the immediate drop zone. Movement is sometimes indirect, mediated by behavior rather than structure. Germination itself is selective. A seed must absorb water, activate metabolic pathways, and extend a root into soil. Oxygen availability is essential. In waterlogged soils, lack of oxygen can inhibit development. In overly dry conditions, insufficient moisture prevents activation. Temperature influences enzyme activity, with most species having defined optimal ranges. Light conditions also matter. Some seeds require direct light to germinate, ensuring that they establish only in open spaces. Others can sprout in low-light environments, relying on stored energy reserves until leaves reach brighter layers. These differences contribute to spatial diversity within forests. The act of dispersal reshapes forest boundaries slowly but persistently. Each generation releases propagules into surrounding space. Some fail, some persist in dormancy, some germinate and survive. Over decades, this steady outward movement can shift the visible edge of a forest by small increments. There is no single direction to this movement. Seeds travel outward in all available pathways. Wind currents, animal roots, water flow, gravity slopes. The distribution appears random at small scales, but reveals patterns when observed over time. Clusters correspond to wind corridors. Lines of growth trace former animal trails. Dense patches emerge where disturbance created opportunity. Seed dispersal is shaped by form, behavior, soil, and timing, each factor determining whether a seed merely travels or truly takes root. At the edge of a clearing, seeds drift through air, others rest dormant in the soil, and pioneer plants begin stabilizing exposed ground. Forests do not move in steps, but through release and persistence. And over decades, these quiet movements slowly reshape the land. Forests do not remain fixed to the maps that describe them. Over long periods, their boundaries shift in response to temperature, precipitation, and seasonal duration. This movement is gradual, often measured in meters per year, yet when observed across decades, it becomes visible. Climate migration does not happen as a single wave. It unfolds unevenly, influenced by terrain, soil, and the tolerance limits of different species. In the Northern Hemisphere, one of the most closely monitored transitions is the boreal forest boundary. The boreal zone, dominated by conifer species, stretches across Canada, Russia, and parts of Northern Europe. As average temperatures rise, the southern edge of this zone experiences increased heat stress and fire frequency, while the northern edge encounters longer growing seasons. These shifts create pressure at both margins, compressing some areas while allowing expansion in others. Near the Arctic Circle, satellite observations over recent decades have documented a gradual increase in tree cover in certain regions. Areas once characterized by open tundra now show patches of woody vegetation, establishing where conditions permit. The expansion is not uniform, but in several locations, shrubs and tree species are appearing beyond their previous limits. Longer frost-free periods and warmer soils contribute to this pattern. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change has included boreal forest migration among its documented ecological responses to global warming. According to multi-model projections, continued temperature increases are expected to shift suitable habitat zones northward and upward in elevation. These projections are based on long-term climate data combined with species distribution modeling. While exact rates vary by region, the overall direction of movement is consistent. In mountainous regions, change is visible along alpine tree lines. The tree line marks the elevation above which climatic conditions prevent sustained tree growth. In parts of the European Alps and other mountain systems, researchers have observed upward movement of tree lines over the past century. Warmer temperatures reduce frost damage at higher elevations, allowing seedlings to survive where they previously could not. The upward shift is often measured in tens of meters over several decades. Northern Europe provides another closely studied example. In Scandinavia, boreal forests have shown signs of gradual extension into areas historically dominated by tundra vegetation. Field surveys and aerial imagery indicate that tree density has increased in some transitional zones. At the same time, southern portions of the boreal region experience heightened drought stress, insect outbreaks, and fire events. Movement occurs at one edge, while instability increases at the other. Migration is constrained by more than temperature alone. Soil composition, permafrost depth, and hydrology influence whether new growth can stabilize. In Arctic-adjacent zones, thawing permafrost can both enable and complicate expansion. Warmer soils allow root penetration, yet unstable ground conditions may limit long-term establishment. Climate creates opportunity, but local conditions determine persistence. These boundary shifts do not represent rapid transformation. Mature forests cannot relocate in a single season. Instead, incremental establishment beyond existing edges gradually redefines the visible landscape. What appears static in a single year becomes measurable over a generation. The forest responds not through sudden relocation, but through accumulated survival at new margins. Climate migration illustrates that forests are dynamic systems embedded within atmospheric patterns. As temperature and precipitation regimes change, the spatial expression of forests adjusts accordingly. Boreal boundaries press northward in some regions, alpine tree lines rise slowly along mountain slopes, and transitional zones expand or contract. The movement is quiet and uneven, yet across decades, it redraws ecological maps without a single tree ever taking a step. Seasonal rhythm in a forest is not announced by sound. It is measured in light. The length of the day, increasing or decreasing by minutes at a time, quietly regulates growth, rest, and transition. Trees do not rely on calendars. They respond to photoperiod, the duration of daylight within a 24-hour cycle. Even slight changes in day length can trigger physiological adjustments long before temperature shifts become noticeable. Photoreceptors within plant cells detect light duration with precision. As days grow longer in spring, hormonal balances shift. Buds that have remained closed through winter begin to swell. Enzymatic activity increases. Stored carbohydrates accumulated during the previous growing season are mobilized to support new leaf and shoot formation. The forest canopy gradually thickens, not in response to warmth alone, but to the steady extension of daylight. During summer, when day length approaches its annual maximum in many temperate regions, photosynthetic activity reaches its peak. Photosynthesis is the process through which plants convert carbon dioxide and water into glucose using light energy. Its rate depends on light intensity, temperature, and water availability. Under optimal conditions, mature forests can absorb substantial quantities of carbon dioxide each day, transforming atmospheric carbon into structural biomass. Leaves high in the canopy are often built for greater photosynthetic capacity, meaning they can convert more sunlight into chemical energy that fuels growth when light is strong and direct. Their thicker structure and denser internal cells support higher rates of carbon processing during long summer days. Lower leaves, growing in shade, have reduced photosynthetic capacity, designed instead to work efficiently in dim, filtered light. So the forest as a whole distributes this light to energy conversion across layers, allowing nearly all available sunlight to be used without overwhelming any single part of the system. As summer progresses toward autumn, day length begins to shorten. The reduction may seem gradual to human perception, yet trees register it precisely. In deciduous species, decreasing photoperiod initiates preparation for leaf senescence. Chlorophyll production declines. Pigments such as carotenoids and anthocyanins, previously masked by green chlorophyll, become visible. Leaves shift from green to yellow, orange, and red before detaching. Leaf drop is not simply a reaction to cold. It is a preemptive adjustment to changing light availability. Maintaining leaves requires water and nutrient investment. When shorter days signal reduced photosynthetic return, trees reabsorb valuable nutrients from leaves before releasing them. Nitrogen and phosphorus are transported back into branches and trunks for storage. What appears as color change is part of nutrient conservation. Evergreen forests follow a different pattern. In regions such as Japan, the dense stands of cedar found in areas like the Japan cedar forests maintain foliage year-round. The species commonly known as Japanese cedar, Cryptomeria japonica, does not shed its leaves seasonally in the way deciduous trees do. Instead, its needle-like foliage persists for multiple years, allowing photosynthesis to occur whenever conditions permit. Even so, day length influences growth rates. Shoot elongation and cambial activity still respond to photoperiod changes. In evergreen systems, winter does not halt photosynthesis entirely. On mild days, when temperatures rise above freezing and sunlight is available, carbon assimilation can continue at reduced levels. This flexibility provides an advantage in climates with variable winter conditions. Rather than committing to a single period of dormancy, evergreen species maintain readiness to utilize intermittent light. Seasonal rhythms are also visible from space. Satellite instruments measure vegetation greenness through indices that track reflected light in specific wavelengths. Data collected by agencies, such as NASA, reveal clear annual cycles in forested regions. Greenness intensifies during spring and summer, declines in autumn, and stabilizes during winter dormancy. These patterns are consistent enough to map seasonal transitions across continents. Remote sensing has shown that the onset of spring greening has shifted slightly earlier in some temperate regions over recent decades. While temperature plays a role, day length remains a primary cue. Photoperiod does not change with climate trends. It remains fixed by Earth's axial tilt and orbital mechanics. Trees interpret this stable signal alongside variable environmental conditions, balancing predictable light cycles with less predictable temperature fluctuations. The coordination between photoperiod and metabolism extends to internal carbon budgeting. During long days, excess carbohydrates produced through photosynthesis are allocated to growth and storage. During shorter days, growth slows and storage becomes the priority. Cambial layers reduce cell division rates. Bud formation for the following year may already be underway, even as leaves fall. In understory environments, seasonal shifts are experienced differently. Before canopy leaf out in spring, light penetrates more deeply to the forest floor. Many herbaceous plants complete much of their annual growth during this brief window. Once the canopy closes, light levels drop significantly. These spring ephemerals rely on timing aligned precisely with day length changes. Cloud cover and local weather introduce short-term variability, yet the overarching seasonal pattern persists. Even in years with unusual temperature swings, the gradual alteration of daylight duration continues. Trees integrate both signals. If warmth arrives early, but day length remains short, bud break may be delayed. This coordination reduces the risk of frost damage from premature growth. Seasonal rhythm also affects respiration. At night, plants respire, releasing some of the carbon fixed during the day. The balance between daytime photosynthesis and nighttime respiration determines net carbon gain. Longer days extend the period available for carbon fixation, increasing seasonal accumulation. As days shorten, the window for assimilation narrows. In temperate deciduous forests, the cumulative effect of these processes creates a visible arc of expansion and retreat. Bud break, full canopy, senescence, and dormancy follow one another with measurable regularity. In evergreen systems, the transitions are subtler but no less real. Needle turnover occurs gradually, and growth rings form annually beneath bark, reflecting seasonal metabolic shifts. Time in forests is therefore encoded in cycles rather than abrupt changes. The daily arc of sunlight sets the tempo. Seasonal elongation and contraction of daylight adjust the amplitude. Photosynthesis accelerates and decelerates in response. Leaves emerge, mature, and fall. Growth is not continuous at a uniform rate. It pulses in alignment with celestial mechanics. When viewed across many years, these seasonal rhythms accumulate into patterns that scientists can quantify. Satellite imagery tracks canopy density and productivity. Field measurements record leaf area index and carbon flux. Yet on the ground, the experience remains subtle. Light lingers slightly longer in the evening. Morning brightness arrives earlier. Leaves shift tone before they detach. Forests do not need to move to respond to time. They adjust through regulation. Hormones rise and fall. Pigments appear and fade. Photosynthetic machinery operates within windows defined by day length. The rhythm is steady, predictable, and repeated each year with minor variation. Seasonal change is often associated with temperature, yet light remains the most reliable signal. It is constant in its annual pattern, immune to short-term fluctuations. Trees evolved to read it precisely. In doing so, they synchronize growth with the turning of the planet itself. Within this framework of light and duration, forests maintain balance. Growth expands during long days, contracts during short ones. Leaves emerge when light allows return on energy investment, and withdraw when it does not. From the forest floor to the upper canopy, every layer responds to the same astronomical rhythm, translating minutes of light into years of structure. Time does not move through every forest at the same pace. In some regions, trees measure their existence not in decades, but in millennia. Longevity, meaning the maximum lifespan a species can biologically sustain, varies dramatically across forest systems. While many temperate trees live a few hundred years, certain species persist far longer, growing slowly under conditions that limit competition but favor endurance. One of the most remarkable examples is the bristlecone pine. Found in high-elevation environments of the western United States, this species grows in cold, dry conditions where soil is thin and temperatures fluctuate sharply. Some individuals are over 4,000 years old. Their survival is linked to slow growth rates and dense wood structure. Growth rings form narrowly, reflecting short growing seasons, yet this slow pace contributes to durability. In regions such as the Great Basin, bristlecone pines occupy rocky slopes where few other trees can compete. Limited nutrients and harsh winds reduce the likelihood of dense forest formation. Paradoxically, this isolation reduces large-scale disturbances from competing vegetation. Sparse surroundings mean fewer intense canopy fires and less pathogen spread. Survival here is not about rapid expansion, but resilience under constraint. Longevity in trees is also tied to cellular maintenance. Over time, outer layers of bark protect inner tissues from insects, fungi, and mechanical damage. In some ancient trees, portions of the trunk may die while other sections remain alive and functional. This partial survival strategy allows the tree to continue transporting water and nutrients even when segments of wood decay. The organism persists despite internal loss. Fire, however, introduces a different rhythm to forest time. Fire ecology, meaning the study of how fire interacts with living systems, reveals that not all fires are destructive in the same way. In many forest types, periodic fire is part of the ecological cycle. It clears underbrush, recycles nutrients into ash, and opens space for regeneration. The interval between fires influences species composition and forest structure. Certain species have evolved specific adaptations to fire. The lodgepole pine is one such example. In many populations, it produces serotinous cones, meaning cones that remain sealed with resin until exposed to high temperatures. When fire passes through a stand, the heat melts the resin, allowing the cones to open and release seeds onto nutrient-rich ash beds. Germination conditions immediately after fire can be favorable due to reduced competition and increased sunlight at ground level. These fire-adapted cones represent a reproductive strategy aligned with disturbance. Rather than avoiding fire entirely, lodgepole pine integrates it into its life cycle. Not all individuals within a species produce serotinous cones. The trait varies depending on regional fire frequency. In areas where fire intervals are long, non-serotinous cones may be more common. This variation reflects adaptation to local patterns. After fire, regeneration begins quickly. Ash enriches soil with minerals such as phosphorus and potassium. Open space reduces competition for light and water. Seedlings establish in dense cohorts, often forming even-aged stands that reflect the timing of the last major burn. Over decades, as the canopy closes and undergrowth accumulates, fuel loads increase again, setting the stage for future cycles. Longevity and fire are not opposing forces, but parallel dimensions of forest time. Some trees endure for thousands of years in relatively stable environments. Others rely on periodic disturbance to renew populations. In both cases, survival depends on alignment with local conditions. The forest persists not through uniform stability, but through varied strategies that balance endurance and renewal across centuries. Long before forests were measured in hectares or mapped by satellite, they were simply where people lived. Early human communities did not encounter forests as protected landscapes or recreational spaces. Forests were shelter, fuel, food source, and boundary all at once. The relationship began not with ownership, but with proximity. Archaeological evidence suggests that some of the earliest agricultural clearings were made within forested regions. As human groups transitioned from nomadic hunting and gathering to settled cultivation, small patches of woodland were cut and burned to create arable land. This technique, often described as slash-and-burn agriculture, allowed nutrients stored in vegetation to return temporarily to the soil as ash. Crops could be grown for several seasons before fertility declined and the clearing was abandoned. The forest would slowly reclaim the space. Early farming did not eliminate forests entirely. It created a shifting mosaic of field and regrowth. These early agricultural zones were usually small in scale. Hand tools limited the speed and extent of clearing. Forest edges, rather than deep interiors, became zones of interaction. People gathered firewood, fruits, nuts, and medicinal plants from nearby stands. Wood provided material for homes, tools, and fences. Forests were not yet commodities. They were extensions of daily survival. As societies became more structured, so did rules governing forest use. In medieval England, large tracts of woodland were designated as royal forests. One of the most well-known examples is Sherwood Forest. Forest law represented an early attempt to formalize control over natural resources. It did not necessarily protect forests for ecological reasons. Instead, it preserved game animals and timber for the ruling class. Yet by restricting access, it inadvertently slowed widespread clearing in certain regions. Governance altered the pace of extraction. In other parts of Europe and the Mediterranean, wood was becoming an increasingly strategic resource. The expansion of cities and the development of shipbuilding intensified demand for strong, durable timber. The Roman Empire, in particular, relied heavily on wood for construction, fuel, and naval fleets. The Roman Empire developed extensive timber supply routes that connected forested regions with urban centers. The Roman timber trade required coordination across large distances. Logs were transported along rivers or hauled over land to ports. Oak and pine were valued for different purposes, including ship hulls, beams, and scaffolding. In some provinces, repeated harvesting led to local depletion, requiring timber to be sourced from more distant territories. This pattern introduced a new scale of forest exploitation, extraction linked to empire-wide infrastructure. Even in ancient systems, there were attempts to regulate cutting. Some Roman legal texts included provisions for controlled harvesting, particularly in areas where timber was essential for military or public works. These regulations were not conservation in the modern sense. They were measures to ensure continuity of supply, yet they indicate an early awareness that forests could be exhausted. In many traditional societies, customary rules shaped forest use at the community level. Access to grazing, collection of fallen wood, and seasonal hunting were often governed by shared agreements. These unwritten systems balanced necessity with restraint. Overharvesting reduced future availability, and communities dependent on nearby forests developed practices that allowed regeneration. The interaction between humans and forests during this early period was therefore layered. On one level, forests were cleared to create agricultural land. On another, they were protected for hunting or reserved for strategic resources. Governance structures, whether royal decrees or local customs, influenced how much forest remained standing. Transportation routes further deepened the relationship. As trade networks expanded, forests near rivers and roads gained economic significance. Timber floated downstream was easier to transport than logs hauled across rough terrain. Regions with navigable waterways often experienced higher extraction rates. Forest composition in such areas gradually shifted as preferred species were selectively removed. The scale of early clearing was still limited by technology. Axes, saws, and animal power constrained how quickly forests could be transformed. Regrowth remained common. Abandoned settlements were sometimes reclaimed by woodland within generations. The boundary between forest and field shifted back and forth over centuries. Religious and cultural beliefs also shaped perception. In some traditions, forests were seen as sacred or spiritually significant. Certain groves were left undisturbed for ritual reasons. While these practices varied widely, they contributed in specific regions to the preservation of particular stands of trees. Protection could arise from reverence as well as regulation. Over time, the cumulative impact of agriculture, trade, and governance altered forest distribution across continents. Yet the transformation was gradual. Large, continuous forest belts still dominated much of Europe, Asia, and the Americas well into the medieval period. Human presence was embedded within forests rather than fully displacing them. The early human relationship with forests was pragmatic and local. Wood was cut for warmth and shelter. Land was cleared for crops. Timber was traded for construction and expansion. Laws were written to protect hunting grounds or secure supply chains. At each stage, forests were integrated into social systems. What distinguishes this period is not the absence of impact, but the scale. Clearing occurred patch by patch. Extraction followed accessible routes. Regrowth remained visible within a human lifetime. The forest was not yet viewed as a global resource or a planetary system. It was a surrounding presence, shaped by hand tools, seasonal labor, and evolving rules. These early patterns laid the groundwork for later transformation. Agricultural expansion established the model of converting woodland to farmland. Legal frameworks introduced the idea that forests could be administratively managed. Trade networks demonstrated that timber could move far beyond its origin. Long before industrial machinery accelerated change, the foundations of forest governance and use were already in place. In this early phase, forests were neither untouched wilderness nor fully controlled assets. They were shared spaces of dependence and regulation. Human life unfolded within their boundaries, drawing from them carefully or, at times, intensively. The relationship was direct, material, and immediate, defined by proximity and necessity rather than abstraction. The scale of human interaction with forests changed dramatically with the Industrial Revolution. What had once been limited by hand tools and animal labor began to accelerate under steam power and mechanized saws. Timber was no longer harvested primarily for local construction or fuel. It became a raw material feeding railways, mines, factories, and expanding cities. Demand intensified not gradually, but exponentially. Railroad expansion in the 19th century required enormous quantities of wood. Sleepers, bridges, telegraph poles, and fuel for steam engines all depended on timber. Forests near transportation routes were cut first, then logging pushed deeper into previously inaccessible regions. Mechanization allowed trees to be felled, transported, and processed at unprecedented speed. Regrowth, once able to keep pace with small-scale clearing, could not match industrial demand. Industrialization also reshaped land ownership patterns. Forests increasingly became commercial assets managed for yield. Private companies and state authorities began to survey and quantify timber resources systematically. Forest inventories, meaning organized assessments of tree volume and species composition, emerged as tools for economic planning. The forest was measured not only in area, but in cubic meters of potential lumber. By the late 19th century, signs of depletion were visible in many regions. Hillsides stripped of trees experienced erosion. River systems clogged with sediment from logging operations. Wildlife populations declined as habitats fragmented. These effects were not universal, but they were pronounced enough to raise concern among observers, who recognized that unchecked extraction could undermine long-term supply. One of the most influential voices during this period was John Muir. Muir argued that forests and wilderness areas possessed value beyond their economic utility. He described mountain landscapes and giant trees with careful detail, emphasizing their ecological and spiritual significance. His writings helped shift public perception, framing forests not only as resources, but as systems worthy of protection. Advocacy efforts contributed to the establishment of protected areas. Among the most significant was Yosemite National Park, which became a symbol of early conservation policy in the United States. National parks represented a departure from purely extractive management. Within their boundaries, commercial logging and development were restricted or prohibited. The goal was preservation of landscapes in a relatively intact state. Conservation movements were not limited to North America. In Europe and Asia, state forestry departments began adopting sustained yield principles, meaning timber would be harvested at rates intended to match regrowth over time. Scientific forestry emerged as a discipline focused on long-term productivity. Forests were divided into management units, and cutting cycles were planned decades in advance. As the 20th century progressed, international cooperation on forestry increased. Organizations began collecting and comparing data across nations. The Food and Agriculture Organization compiles global forestry statistics, tracking forest cover, deforestation rates, and wood production. These datasets reveal regional differences in forest change, highlighting both losses and areas of stabilization or gain. FAO forestry data show that while some tropical regions have experienced significant forest reduction, other areas, particularly in parts of Europe, have seen gradual increases in forest cover due to reforestation and land use shifts. The picture is uneven. Industrial logging continues in many parts of the world, yet conservation frameworks and sustainable practices have also expanded. Modern sustainable forestry aims to balance economic use with ecological integrity. Sustainable forestry, meaning management that meets present needs without compromising future forest function, incorporates biodiversity protection, soil conservation, and long-term regeneration planning. Selective logging, rather than clear-cutting, is used in some systems to maintain canopy continuity. Buffer zones protect waterways from sedimentation. Certification programs have emerged to provide accountability. Forest products labeled under sustainability standards indicate that harvesting followed specific environmental and social guidelines. These systems do not eliminate impact, but they introduce oversight mechanisms designed to reduce unsustainable practices. Transparency and traceability are increasingly central components of forest management. Industrialization introduced unprecedented pressure on forests, yet it also generated awareness of ecological limits. Conservation movements reframed forests as more than timber reserves. Scientific management sought to align extraction with regeneration. International data collection provides ongoing measurement of change. The human presence in forests remains significant, but it is increasingly shaped by frameworks that recognize both economic demand and ecological continuity. At the same time, forests have come to be understood as climate regulators. Beyond timber yield, they are now evaluated for carbon storage, watershed protection, and biodiversity support. Policy discussions increasingly include ecosystem services, meaning the measurable benefits natural systems provide to human societies. Forest management plans in many countries now account for carbon sequestration potential alongside wood production targets, integrating ecological function into economic planning. This shift does not remove complexity or conflict. Expanding populations continue to require housing materials, paper, energy, and agricultural land. Yet contemporary forestry operates within a more explicit awareness of consequence. Management decisions are informed by long-term projections, regeneration models, and international reporting standards. The forest is no longer viewed solely as a supply source or a wilderness to be sealed off, but as a dynamic system that must be used, measured, and sustained across generations. Forests in the present moment are measured not only by their height or density, but by the carbon they hold. Carbon storage, meaning the capacity of an ecosystem to absorb and retain carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, has become one of the most closely studied forest functions. Through photosynthesis, trees convert atmospheric carbon dioxide into sugars that build trunks, branches, leaves, and roots. Over time, this carbon becomes structural tissue. Some of it remains locked within wood for centuries. Forests function as carbon sinks, a term used to describe systems that absorb more carbon than they release. Each year, global forests collectively remove billions of tons of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. This absorption moderates the pace of climate change by reducing the concentration of greenhouse gases. The effectiveness of a forest as a carbon sink depends on growth rates, species composition, soil health, and disturbance frequency. Carbon is stored not only in visible wood, but also in forest soils. In many ecosystems, soil contains more carbon than the trees above it. When leaves fall and decompose, part of that carbon returns to the atmosphere, but a significant portion becomes integrated into organic soil layers. The balance between carbon uptake through photosynthesis and carbon release through respiration and decay determines whether a forest remains a net sink. Globally, forest distribution influences this balance. The continent with the largest forest area is South America, largely due to the vast tropical systems it contains. At the national scale, Russia holds the largest total forest area of any country, with extensive boreal forests stretching across its territory. These northern forests store immense quantities of carbon in both biomass and frozen soils. Their scale makes them central to global carbon accounting. Among tropical systems, the Congo Basin represents one of the most significant carbon reservoirs. Spanning multiple Central African nations, it is the second largest tropical rainforest in the world. Its dense vegetation and deep soils sequester substantial amounts of carbon annually. At the same time, limited infrastructure in parts of the region has historically slowed large-scale industrial clearing, though pressures are increasing. In South America, the Amazon rainforest remains one of the most closely monitored ecosystems on Earth. Satellite systems track deforestation, regrowth, and seasonal canopy changes. Brazilian monitoring programs, supported by space-based observation, provide high-resolution data on forest loss and land conversion. These systems detect changes in canopy cover often within days of occurrence. Monitoring reveals that tropical forests face ongoing pressure. Annual forest loss in tropical regions is measured in millions of hectares. Agricultural expansion, cattle ranching, logging, and infrastructure development contribute to this decline. When forests are cleared or burned, carbon stored in vegetation is released rapidly into the atmosphere. The shift from sink to source can occur within a single season. Climate change itself adds complexity. Rising temperatures and altered rainfall patterns affect growth rates. In some regions, longer growing seasons may increase carbon uptake temporarily. In others, drought stress reduces photosynthetic activity and increases tree mortality. Extended dry periods can also make forests more vulnerable to fire, which releases stored carbon in concentrated pulses. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change incorporates forest carbon dynamics into its climate projections. Models suggest that continued warming could alter the capacity of forests to function as reliable carbon sinks. In some scenarios, portions of tropical forests risk reaching tipping points, meaning thresholds beyond which ecosystem structure shifts significantly. Reduced rainfall combined with higher temperatures can limit regrowth and increase vulnerability to disturbance. Carbon sink capacity is not uniform across forest types. Young, rapidly growing forests often absorb carbon at higher rates because new wood formation is active. Mature forests, while slower in net growth, contain vast accumulated carbon stocks. Protecting existing old-growth systems prevents large emissions that would occur if they were cleared. Both growth and preservation influence climate outcomes. Tropical forests are particularly significant because they combine high biomass density with rapid turnover. Their carbon cycling operates at accelerated rates compared to colder regions. Losses in these systems therefore have disproportionate atmospheric impact. Even relatively small percentage declines translate into substantial carbon releases. The present moment in forest history is therefore defined by measurement. Satellites track canopy cover. Field plots record tree diameter and growth increments. Soil cores assess carbon concentration. Data from multiple continents are integrated into global carbon budgets. The forest is now observed at planetary scale. Yet despite advanced monitoring, uncertainty remains. Climate feedback loops are complex. Forests interact with atmospheric moisture through evapotranspiration, influencing rainfall patterns regionally. Large-scale deforestation can alter local climates, which in turn affect remaining forests. Carbon systems operate within broader hydrological and temperature networks. As pressures intensify, the question is not only how much carbon forests currently store, but how stable that storage will remain. Sink capacity depends on health, connectivity, and resilience to disturbance. The balance between absorption and release is dynamic, adjusting annually in response to environmental conditions. In the present moment, forests stand at the intersection of biology and climate physics. They absorb, store, and sometimes release carbon in patterns that influence global temperature trajectories. Their distribution across continents, from boreal expanses in Russia to tropical systems in Africa and South America, shapes atmospheric composition at scale. The story of forest carbon is not static. It changes year by year as growth, loss, and recovery shift the balance. Monitoring systems continue to refine estimates. Projections evolve as new data emerge. What remains consistent is the role forests play as living carbon reservoirs, integrating sunlight, water, and atmospheric gases into wood and soil. Forests continue absorbing carbon even as parts of them are reduced. The numbers shift year by year. Satellite maps update quietly. In some regions, growth slightly outweighs loss. In others, emissions rise faster than absorption. Carbon moves through trunks, branches, roots, and soil without announcement, linking forest health directly to atmospheric balance. What stands today across continents is not only landscape, but living storage measured, monitored, and increasingly central to how the planet regulates its temperature. Where forest loss has accelerated, restoration efforts have also expanded. Reforestation and afforestation are no longer abstract environmental ideas, but structured programs backed by governments, research institutions, and international coalitions. Restoration, meaning the deliberate attempt to re-establish tree cover and ecological function in degraded landscapes, varies widely in method and scale. Some projects focus on planting millions of seedlings. Others rely on natural regeneration, supported by protection from grazing and logging. One of the most widely discussed rapid planting approaches is the Miyawaki method, developed by the Japanese botanist Akira Miyawaki. This technique involves planting diverse native species densely within a small area to stimulate accelerated growth and layered structure. By recreating natural forest composition at high planting density, the method aims to establish a self-sustaining woodland within a few decades rather than a century. Urban plots, schoolyards, and degraded land parcels in multiple countries have adopted this model. Large-scale restoration can also span continents. The Great Green Wall Initiative in Africa seeks to restore degraded landscapes across the Sahel region. Rather than a single continuous line of trees, it represents a mosaic of reforestation, agroforestry, and soil stabilization projects. Its objective is not only ecological but social, aiming to reduce desertification, improve food security, and strengthen rural economies. Tree planting here intersects directly with livelihoods. Urban forestry has become another focal point. In cities, trees mitigate heat, filter air pollutants, and manage stormwater runoff. The London Urban Forestry Strategy integrates tree planting into city planning, emphasizing canopy coverage targets and species diversity. Urban forests, meaning networks of trees within metropolitan environments, now form part of climate adaptation planning. They reduce urban heat island effects and provide measurable cooling during extreme temperature events. Restoration is increasingly guided by data. Light detection and ranging, abbreviated as LiDAR, and meaning a remote sensing technology that uses laser pulses to measure surface structure, allows scientists to map forest height, density, and biomass with remarkable precision. At the genetic level, DNA barcoding, meaning the identification of species through short, standardized genetic sequences, supports biodiversity monitoring. By analyzing environmental DNA in soil or water samples, scientists can detect which species are present even when they are not visually observed. This technique helps evaluate whether restored forests are regaining ecological diversity rather than simply increasing tree count. Global assessments continue to track forest extent and change. When considering total forest area by country, Russia remains first in the world, with vast boreal expanses stretching across its territory. This scale makes national policies in such regions globally significant. Forest distribution is uneven, and restoration potential varies depending on land use, climate, and governance. Future projections extend beyond current restoration efforts. Climate models simulate forest responses under different greenhouse gas emission scenarios. In pathways where emissions decline rapidly, forests are expected to retain stronger carbon sink capacity. In higher emission scenarios, increased drought stress and fire frequency may reduce net absorption. The outcome depends not only on atmospheric concentration, but on land management decisions. Global assessments continue to track forest extent and change. When considering total forest area by country, Russia remains first in the world, with vast boreal expanses stretching across its territory. At the continental scale, South America holds the largest share of global forest cover, largely due to the Amazon basin. This distribution matters because large forest holders influence the global carbon balance disproportionately. Yet forest presence does not guarantee stability. In tropical regions, where biodiversity and biomass density are highest, annual forest loss continues in several countries, particularly within parts of the Amazon basin. By the year 2100, forest distribution is projected to shift geographically. Suitable habitat zones for many species are expected to move poleward or upward in elevation. Some tropical regions may experience reduced resilience if precipitation patterns alter significantly. Boreal forests may expand in some areas, while contracting in others due to fire and pest outbreaks. These scenarios are not predictions of certainty, but models of possibility. Restoration does not guarantee identical recovery. Newly planted forests differ structurally from old growth systems for decades. Soil carbon may take generations to rebuild. Biodiversity often returns gradually rather than immediately. Sustainable forestry planning now incorporates long-term monitoring cycles that extend beyond single planting campaigns. Success is measured not only in hectares planted, but in ecosystem stability over time. Technological observation, policy frameworks, and local action converge in this present moment. Satellite imagery, LiDAR scans, and genetic sequencing provide clarity about forest condition. Urban planners integrate canopy cover into infrastructure design. Regional initiatives seek to stabilize degraded landscapes. Forests are no longer managed solely for timber. They are evaluated for climate regulation, biodiversity, and human well-being simultaneously. Even as tropical loss remains a concern in several regions, restoration capacity has expanded. The balance between deforestation and reforestation remains uneven globally, yet awareness has shifted toward long-term stewardship. Forest futures are shaped by decisions made at multiple scales, from village-level planting to international climate agreements. Forests in the present moment are neither purely declining nor fully secure. They are systems under pressure and under care at the same time. Carbon moves through their trunks. Seeds wait beneath their soil. Satellites measure their canopy. Across continents, from boreal expanses to urban corridors, their trajectories are being recalculated. The future of forests will not unfold in a single direction. It will emerge from countless local actions, guided by data, policy, and the quiet persistence of trees themselves. Forests remain present, layered in light and shadow, growing, burning, recovering, and storing time in ways that do not hurry. Some expand, some recede. Some stand unchanged for centuries. What continues, quietly, is the rhythm itself. Carbon settles into wood. Roots move through soil. Light returns each morning. And the forest, in all its scales, remains a system that breathes slowly, whether we measure it or not.